Hearing voices.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
This is Hearing Voices. Conversations with the voices that bring the excitement of college sports alive.
No headphone can capture the complex bourbon and butter flavor of my actual timber.
Now, here's your host, the voice of your Fighting Tigers, Chris Blair.
Hey, we are back again, Tiger fans. It is another week of Hearing Voices, headed into another week of SEC football. This time it's going to be a late night, Saturday night, Tiger Stadium, as Auburn and LSU get together to renew an old SEC rivalry. Going to be a late one, as I said, kickoff around 8:10, 8:11. But it should make for a great atmosphere, always a good matchup and some legendary battles for a long, long time, certainly not the least of which, minus last year, the recent memory between these two teams have been spectacular games. I don't think we can expect anything different coming up this weekend. Glad to have with us this week on the show one of the great voices in college sports, somebody that I consider a friend and really one of the good guys in our business. And you hear him whether you're streaming, whether you're listening on the radio, whether you're listening on satellite radio. When you hear Auburn play, you're listening to Mr. Andy Burcham. Andy, it is great to have you. Thanks for joining us again for the second time round here on Hearing Voices. Good to see you. You didn't shy away. I didn't scare you off. You decided to come back for a second time.
I appreciate that, Chris. Thank you very much. We always look forward to our trips to Baton Rouge, whether it's for football or basketball or baseball. We'll get to come back, I think, for baseball at least this year. Always look forward to our trips to Baton Rouge and looking forward to this 8 o'clock start on Saturday night.
Let's talk about the fact that it is going to be that late, of course. It's a late start. It makes for hopefully a full crowd. Hopefully it brings in a good road trip for Auburn fans. I think it's probably got to be one of the, not the closest, but not a bad trip to get over here. And then hopefully Tiger fans are going to respond because we got 3-1 teams coming in here. New coaching staff for Auburn. Going to talk to you about that in just a little bit. The Tigers, of course, coming in. A lot of question marks, getting better each and every week. But maybe the biggest challenge of the season, just simply because last year's game was an absolute whipping over at Edwards-Helaire. And the fact that I mentioned, these two always seem to play each other pretty good, and you always get a pretty good battle out of it.
Well, for one thing, Auburn hasn't won there since 1999. And the last time that Auburn won in Tiger Stadium, Stan White, who's now in his 21st season as the color analyst of the Auburn Sports Network, Stan and I were doing tape-delayed TV that night. And it was before you had an upper deck in the south end zone at Tiger Stadium. And our vantage point literally was underneath the scoreboard at the old Tiger Stadium. And we climbed a ladder to get up there, and that was where we called the game, from the end zone. And our replay monitor didn't work. So Stan was just making up the replays as we went along. And Auburn hasn't won a football game down there since. So I don't know if we need to be underneath the scoreboard this year or not for Auburn to win a football game. But there have been some terrific battles in Tiger Stadium as long as I've been doing the games with and for Auburn. And in 1997, Auburn came from behind a last-minute drive. Damian Craig, who was, of course, on your staff at one point, an outstanding quarterback at Auburn, has been an assistant coach at Auburn, now at Texas A&M, led Auburn on a last-second drive for that win, lost a heartbreaker when Bo Nix's father, Patrick, was the quarterback, the infamous phantom whistle in the end zone, the Magic is Back night. That was the night of the Magic is Back at Tiger Stadium. There was the last-second touchdown pass for LSU the night that Auburn could not hit a field goal. And Auburn has had leads and lost those leads in the years since 1999. So it should be a very interesting game this Saturday night because I think there's question marks for both of these teams. LSU certainly seems to be playing better since that loss at UCLA. Auburn played well but did not win at Penn State and then did not have a good first half at all last week against Georgia State, and you'd have to say was considered fortunate to win its homecoming game against Georgia State. And now you get ready to go to LSU, and you have to find out which Auburn team shows up. If it's the team at Penn State playing in front of 109,000 there at Happy Valley in their whiteout game, or is it the team that really struggled for a half of football last week at home against Georgia State? We'll find out Saturday night.
It's interesting because, I think over here, Andy, you mentioned the dry spell that Auburn has had inside Tiger Stadium. It's one of the things you'll hear from a few people, but leading up to a game, that talk kind of dampens down because, as we all know, when that streak eventually ends, it's going to be LSU in the loser column. So they don't really talk about it as much, and then they get back to that conversation. If LSU wins on a Saturday night, that's what everybody talks about on Sunday. What is it like on the Plains? And maybe even more specific this year, because you got Coach Harsin coming in. He's still putting his stamp on the Auburn program. He obviously had nothing to do with the previous trip since '99 to Tiger Stadium. Is it something that looms large at Auburn, or is it a concentrated effort to say, hey, look, what happened last year, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, none of that impacts. We got to go do what we do. How big is that dry spell, not necessarily from the staff, but from Auburn fans?
It's huge, Chris. I mean, it's talked about all the time. And I think part of the reason is not just the fact that Auburn hasn't won since '99. It's how Auburn has lost a couple of the games since 1999. And Auburn truly believes that it took some better teams than LSU to Baton Rouge and still did not come out with a victory. And, we know about all of the quirky things about this rivalry, from the earthquake to the fire to phantom whistles to all kinds of things. There's a lot of things that have happened in this rivalry, but nothing is at the Auburn fans' mind forefront more than the losing streak in Baton Rouge. And as tough as it has been for Auburn lately against Georgia, this is the longest losing streak for Auburn, certainly on the road, that it has on the schedule. So it is a big deal at Auburn, and will be a big deal when that streak ever comes to a close. And for Auburn's sake, we're all hoping that it's this Saturday night.
Having a great time, as always, visiting with our friend Andy Burcham, voice of the Auburn Tigers. I want to talk about sportscasting. That's why I do this show. But you bring up the fact that Auburn played so well. National audience, on the road, wide out, all of that it takes to prepare and play well in that atmosphere, and then struggle against Georgia State. Now, you've seen a lot of Auburn football. Obviously, you also have seen this team under Coach Harsin through the first couple of weeks of the season. Is it possible? There's a theory that maybe that loss, tough loss, emotional loss, physical loss to Penn State carried over in that second week, and we may not have been looking at the Auburn team that certainly we can expect to see Saturday night.
Well, we talked about it last week in the pregame before the Georgia State matchup, and it was homecoming at Auburn. And it was a sandwich game. It comes after that first loss with this new staff on the road in front of a national television audience. And you come home, and now you're about to start the Southeastern Conference a week later, by the way, at LSU, where Auburn hasn't won in this century. So I suppose there was some letdown in the first half against Georgia State. Auburn played better in the second half, certainly played much better on defense in the second half, but didn't get the offense moving. Scored only one offensive touchdown in the game, scored on a blocked punt that was covered in the end zone for its first touchdown, and then didn't get its first offensive touchdown until the final minute of the fourth quarter. And T.J. Finley, of course, the transfer from LSU, led Auburn on a 98-yard drive. And on 4th and 9, eluded the rush, kind of a broken play. It was a broken play. And he found Chedrick Jackson in the end zone for his first career touchdown. And then on Georgia State's drive, its second play of its next drive, got a pick six to salt the game away. But until that fourth down pass from Finley to Jackson, there was a lot of doubt as to whether Auburn was going to pull this game out. And then if that doesn't happen, if Auburn doesn't beat Georgia State, I can't even imagine what it's like now as it gets ready to go to LSU. So at least Auburn wins the football game. And now, you get ready for the start of the Southeastern Conference. And for Auburn, that game against Georgia State is it for the non-conference until postseason. It's SEC the rest of the year. It's like we're playing the schedule from a year ago, where it was all SEC every week. Well, it's like that for Auburn for the rest of the season. And Auburn goes to LSU this Saturday night, and then we'll be back at home against one of the natural rivals on the schedule, Georgia, next week. There is no more chance for a letdown for this schedule, is the point I'm trying to make, for the rest of this season for Auburn. You let down any game the rest of the year, and you're in a heap of trouble for the rest of this season.
I think there's some similar comparisons in the sense at LSU. You had a tough game in week 1. You made some improvements week 2 against McNeese. Got a little bit better in week 3 against Central Michigan, and then you pulled out a win on the road. Never an easy thing to do in conference play against Mississippi State. But there's a similar theme in the fact that the reason that you lost to UCLA and the reason that you've given up some plays, even against McNeese late, the Chippewas as well as Mississippi State came roaring back there late in the second half. Those things continue. And when you get to games like coming up Saturday and for the rest of the SEC schedule for your LSU, those mistakes, you're not going to be in the lead. You're not going to be trying to hold on to a lead. You're going to be trying to get back to tie a football game up. All right, we're talking to Andy Burcham, and we are both preparing to get ready for the game on Saturday. It's Tuesday when we're talking, Tuesday afternoon. What's Andy Burcham doing right now? What has he been doing? And in preparation, what does your week look like, and what does Tuesday consist of?
I'll tell you what, it starts with the previous Thursday for me. I try to get names and numbers on my spotting board for the game the next week on my board by that time. So come Monday morning when I come into the office, I start working in. Monday to me is my crunch day at the office. I do a couple of interviews with a couple coaches on the Auburn campus, other sports on campus, but primarily Monday is my day to really hunker down and look at my spotting boards and try and get notes. And a lot of times it depends on when you get the opposing team's game notes. For Auburn, I get my Auburn notes on Monday, and I'm working on it really all throughout the day. Tuesday, you're trying to refine the notes a little bit. One thing I've added this year, Chris, and this idea came to me from Mike Kelly, who is the longtime voice at Missouri. And Mike and I worked together way back in the day, back in Carbondale, Illinois, when he was a student at SIU Carbondale. And I called him this summer. And I said, listen, I'm just looking for some ideas here. This is my third year as the radio voice for Auburn, and my third year doing football for Auburn. And I said I'd like to refine what I do. I'd like to do a better job of what I'm doing. And he gave me a really interesting tip that I've been working on through this season. In addition to those spotting boards, and I do one for me, and I do one for Gene Dulaney, who's our spotter. Mine has notes and facts and numbers and stats and that type of thing on it. Gene's boards are nothing but number and name. But Mike's suggestion was that he does a one-sheeter, so to speak, of notes that he can refer to throughout the broadcast. And I do one for Auburn, one page for Auburn, one page this week for LSU. I laminate it, and then I have a Sharpie, and then I can, cross off something that I use throughout the game. And it has really helped me condense my prep for the game. So I'm not trying to look through 49 pages of LSU notes or 30-some pages of Auburn notes for a fact. Hopefully I've got it on that sheet that I can refer to throughout the game. That has really helped me. But Monday and Tuesday are primarily the days to really work on those boards. Wednesday is our day now for the coaches show that takes place with Coach Harsin. And then Thursday, again, I start to work on the next opponent. So I'll start looking at Georgia a little bit and try and get names and numbers on the board. And Friday, for a home game, I host a luncheon for the Auburn family over at Edwards-Helaire Stadium. This Friday, of course, it's a travel day for us. We'll be driving down to Baton Rouge. So for an away game, the game prep really ramps up. It condenses to a 4-day week rather than a 5-day week. If we're at home, you've got if something comes up, someone's hurt in practice or whatever, you've got a chance to change things in your notes or on your board. But this week, of course, it's basically done by Thursday because we're on the road most of the day on Friday.
Andy Burcham, our guest this week. You mentioned new coach, which, by the way, I was taking notes while you were talking there. Mike Kelly, he's full of great ideas. So yeah, I'm glad you got that. I made some notes here, and I'm going to try to do better myself. You've been in this business a while, and we all, if we're long enough, fortunate enough to have a sustained career, you're going to go through coaches, not just football coaches, but women's basketball coaches, men's basketball coaches, baseball coaches, and the like. One of the things I've asked a lot of people over the years, even when I was just working as a producer at Clemson, what are the ways that you ingratiate yourself and build that trust? Because again, you got to have that trust with the coach you're working for. I've said a lot of times that you're not necessarily going to be best friends or best buds with a coach. I don't necessarily think that's probably what you're looking for, but you do need that relationship that says, I know he has my back, he has the program's best interest. So how do you go about trying to earn that trust very early on when a new coach comes to town?
That's a great question, Chris, and I'm not sure there's the magic bullet for it, quite frankly. It depends somewhat on what I'm doing, or you, for example, or any broadcaster, but it also depends on that coach. How quickly are they going to allow themselves to trust what I'm doing? And I try to tell them up front, listen, I'm here for you as the head coach. And hopefully they know of my work. If they ask around with their folks on campus, they'll know that I've been doing this for a long, long time. And I can be trusted to do what is best for the program. And sometimes you develop friendships. I consider Joe Ciampi, who was the women's basketball coach at Auburn for a number of years, and I worked with for a number of years, and Hal Baird, legendary baseball coach at Auburn, who, again, I was able to work with. I consider those gentlemen friends of mine, especially more so now that they're not the coaches any longer. But listen, it doesn't matter what coach you're working with, what sport you're working with, whether it's a men's program or a women's program, you have to develop the trust with that coach. And sometimes it may take a while. Maybe it takes a season to develop that trust where you feel like you're part of, not necessarily that program, but you're part of a group that individual trusts, and they can count on you to do that. And with Brian Harsin, I hope we're developing that right now, but remember, he comes in, he's named the Auburn football coach on Christmas Eve, and we don't have a chance to talk to him until January. Well, it's still COVID at this point. So he hasn't met in person with the media at all so far. I've had the opportunity to be with him at a couple of events that have taken place, and Zoom calls that we've done for events and with the Letterman and that type of thing. So he's starting to get to know me a little bit. It's not like we sit and talk family the whole time. We're talking football. And he's got a lot on his plate. And I just hope, as the season goes along, that he can see that I'm someone that can be trusted. But as you know, Chris, that's not something that we, as the broadcaster, that can force on that coach. It has to happen organically. And sometimes it happens quickly. Sometimes it takes a while. But you pray that it does happen and they feel that they can trust you with whatever information is needed to do this job.
No doubt about it. I mean, it's not one of those things, as you say, you just wave a wand and suddenly there's that trust and relationship. So you got to be earning it. And it's not something that you earn and then forget about it. It's something you earn, I find, on a daily, weekly basis, season by season by season. Real quickly, before I let you go, had a chance, I'm sure you did as well, to watch the recent SEC story, More Than a Voice. And you work at a place where there are certainly on the Mount Rushmore of SEC announcers. Jim Fyffe, longtime announcer, our good friend and unfortunate loss of Rod Bramblett was there. And now you fill in those shoes, which are mighty big shoes. And we talked about that 2 years ago when you were on the show. But a really good piece on Auburn and its radio history. Your thoughts on not only that, but also just the documentary as a whole, because for people like me who grew up wanting to emulate those type guys that we all knew, the John Wards, the Kaywood Ledfords, the Bob Fultons, the Jim Fyffes, which oddly enough, growing up in eastern Kentucky, my father knew both Jim when he was younger before he came to the Plains, and his brother Paul, who was a radio guy there in Paintsville, Kentucky. I think Paintsville was about 35, 40 miles from where I grew up. But again, your thoughts on more than a voice and how maybe that you carry that same type of responsibility, even though we're in 2021 where, sports is consumed on so many different levels. The impact that those guys make on what we do every day and what they've meant to the conference.
Well, the one thing that I learned very quickly when I came to Auburn in 1988 was just how important Jim Fyffe and then Charlie Trotman were to Auburn. And Charlie was a guy that was featured in the documentary and a guy that had played football for Auburn. But those were the radio voices for Auburn in the 80s when Auburn reemerged as a football power in the Southeastern Conference and nationally. The 70s had been a tough decade for Auburn after that 72 Amazins team. And Auburn had lost 9 straight years to Alabama, and then when Coach Dye comes in, Jim Fyffe also comes in as the play-by-play voice. And so Jim Fyffe broadcasts Bo Jackson, and in basketball he broadcasts for Charles Barkley, 2 enormous names in Auburn history. So you quickly learn how important those gentlemen are, not only just to Saturdays, but to everyday life in the South. And then Rod takes over after Jim passes away in 2003. And Rod and I are about the same age, and Rod quickly learns how important the job is. And then, of course, Rod passes away in 2019, and I had an idea. I mean, I'd been around it for a long, long time, but you don't know until you actually do the job. And one thing about this position, and Chris, the position you're in, listen, I mean, it's something that I've worked for my entire career. Quite frankly, didn't think it would ever occur, and was fine with that after Rod had the job. I mean, Rod was younger than I am, so I thought that chance had passed me by. But I never take for granted the chair that I sit in. This chair, this office was Rod's. It's still Rod's office. I may have my stuff in it, but it's still Rod's office. And I mean, you take over for another legend there at LSU, and a guy that Rod broadcast next to for many years at the old Alec box and at the new Alec box in Jim Hawthorne. And the one of the things about this job that I cherish is getting to know a Chris Blair or a Jim Hawthorne or an Eli Gold or David Kellum or whomever around this league. You get to know them hopefully more than just a broadcaster. You get to know about their families. And I cherish that. I mean, Bob Kessling and I used to do women's basketball games together back in 1988. Now, Bob's been the radio voice taking over for John Ward. He's been there for well over 20 years now. But you see how important these gentlemen are to generations of people. And I wish they'd have been able to spend more time on some of the other schools in the league. And that probably could have been made into a multi-part series just to take in all the different gentlemen that have been in the roles that they play in folks' lives across the Southeastern Conference. And now we'll get to know the guys and gals from Oklahoma and Texas here in the next couple of years. And I look forward to that.
In our remaining moments with Andy Burcham, who will be bringing his crew over here to Tiger Stadium Saturday night, LSU and Auburn getting together once again. One thing I thought was interesting, you talking about the relationships that we build with our colleagues around the conference. Last summer, of course, with the pandemic, baseball being scrapped, and we didn't know when we would actually be back to seeing one another, or even calling games for that matter. I know we had a chance to be on a Zoom call, and maybe we're on there an hour, hour and a half, but we could have been on there 4 or 5 hours just enjoying each other's company, because there really are some friendships across the league. And, it's great when you get to go, especially for you and I doing all 3 sports. We get to crisscross with different folks throughout the season. But it showed that we really did want to keep up with one another. And we probably could have gone 4 or 5 hours, but eventually they had to pull the plug and move on.
It was nice to be at least in a Zoom room, so to speak, with everybody, because even at that time we didn't know if we were going to get to call any games, let alone some remotely or in person. So yeah, it was nice. And listen, when we get together, you may say, hey, listen, I'm missing a cord. You guys have some, you need some help. That person is there to help you from a technical standpoint. Or you're just, hey, where should I go for dinner? Baseball trips, or, where should we go for dinner tonight? It can be something as small as that. But I enjoy the friendships and the camaraderie that we have. And it's one of the great joys in this job is getting together, guys, with guys like you, Chris, and just shaking a hand and saying, how are things going? Wow, your team's really playing so well right now, and it's something that I look forward to every time I go into the booth and getting a chance to walk over to the other booth and saying hello and to catch up on our time.
Andy is truly one of the gentlemen of our business, and I told him yesterday I was looking forward to talking with him because I really do enjoy it and enjoy his broadcasting. He's another one, and you hear me say it each and every week because a lot of these guys we get a chance to talk to are my heroes, and like he said, friends. But when I'm out and LSU is done or we're waiting to play, and I can scan the dial or check the stream, I can find the Auburn Radio Network and listening to Andy and his crew. Last thing I have for you, we said in the beginning there's always a storyline when Auburn and LSU get together, but I got to get your thoughts, see if you can give us a little scuttlebutt here, going back to that trust issue with Coach Harsin. What do you think? Who's going to start quarterback Saturday when they kick it off a little after 8 o'clock? Are we gonna see T.J. Finley? And secondly, on that, in this world of the transfer portal, I'm sure down the road we're going to see more of these stories. But it'll be a first for me watching possibly 2 guys who were in the same QB room, took reps together, worked together, friends together, go at it on the field Saturday night.
I can honestly tell you, Chris, I don't know who's going to start on Saturday. Brian Harsin had his press conference yesterday and said he has not named a quarterback yet. He has his show tomorrow evening. We'll ask the question. We'll see if he gives us an answer. I could see either of the quarterbacks starting in the game. Bo Nix has played well in the past against LSU. He certainly played well against LSU here last year. T.J. Finley comes off of an iconic drive, 98 yards in the last couple minutes to pull out a victory. So I could see either one of these guys starting, and I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see both quarterbacks in the game. And I'm not holding back information. I truly don't know who will start this game on Saturday again, but I would not be surprised if both don't play in that game on Saturday. It will be an intriguing storyline, that's for certain, when Auburn comes a calling Saturday night there at Tiger Stadium.
I certainly do believe you. I know the world you live in. I live in that same world. I don't have any definitive information, but I feel the same way you do. I think the Tigers are actually preparing. The LSU Fighting Tigers are preparing to see both Nix and Finley on Saturday night. Andy, I can't thank you enough. Again, it's always fun to visit with you. Thank you for your time. It's a busy week. It's a busy time of year. We'll see you Saturday night. I'm sure you'll have a great call. Here's to having a great call, and then looking forward to seeing you across the conference for the next several months until we reach summer.
Looking forward to it, Chris. Thank you very much for the visit today. We'll see you in Baton Rouge Saturday night.
All right, my friend. Safe travels. All right, Andy Burcham, voice of the Auburn Tigers. He'll be on the call for the Auburn Radio Network on Saturday night when LSU and Auburn get together with kickoff once again just after 8 p.m. on a Saturday night in Death Valley. Fans, don't forget, it's easy to subscribe to Hearing Voices. It makes it easy because whenever we drop one, it goes right to your mobile device. So we appreciate it if you'll do that. And you can also find the podcast online at lsusports.net/ podcast. My thanks to Andy Burcham for joining us, and as always, thanks for stopping by our little show. We'll be back here next week, and until then, this is Chris Blair, still Hearing Voices.
Hearing Voices is a production of LSU-SP and Playfly Sports. Hit the subscribe button now and never miss a new episode. You can follow Chris at LSU Tigers Voice. The LSU Sports Radio Network, a division of LSU-SP and Playfly Sports.